My wife had barely taken off her coat when I noticed the empty chair. Rachel's birthday dinner was already underway in the dining room. Candles glowing beside a cake she had insisted Daniel order from her favorite bakery. Linda set the bottle of wine we'd brought on the counter and smiled when Rachel thanked her, but I could tell something was off. Daniel kept moving between the kitchen and table, straightening things that didn't need straightening. A place setting disappeared while Linda was helping Susan carry in a salad. "Wasn't Carol coming tonight?" Linda asked. Daniel stopped with a stack of plates in his hands. He looked at Rachel. That was the first thing I noticed. Linda had asked our son, but he waited for his wife to answer. Rachel folded a napkin beside her plate. She decided not to come. Linda frowned. "That's strange. I talked to her this morning." Rachel's hand stopped. She thought she wasn't invited. Nobody said anything for a second. Mark, one of Daniel's oldest friends, looked down at his glass. Susan paused beside the table. Linda seemed to realize how the question had landed. "I'm not accusing anyone," she said. "I just thought maybe there was a misunderstanding." "There isn't," Rachel replied. Her voice was calm, but I had spent 35 years managing restaurants. I knew the difference between someone responding to an unexpected problem and someone waiting for one. Rachel had been watching Linda all evening, correcting small comments, cutting across stories, noticing every time Linda spoke. Daniel put the plates down. "Rachel," he said quietly. She ignored him. "This is exactly what I didn't want tonight," she said. "One dinner, one birthday, and somehow we're already discussing who was invited and who wasn't." Linda's face flushed. "I asked one question. You always have a question. That isn't fair." Rachel pushed her chair back and stood. "Then maybe you should leave." At first, I thought she meant the conversation. In the argument. "Walk away from the table for a minute." Linda seemed to think the same thing. She nodded once. "Fine. We can talk about it another time." Rachel shook her head. "No, I mean leave the house." The room went completely still. Linda looked at Daniel. Our son said nothing. Then she looked at me. I had come to a birthday dinner expecting cake, bad jokes, and maybe an argument over who got the last piece. Instead, my wife was standing beside me while our daughter-in-law told her, in front of everyone, that she was no longer welcome in the room. For a moment, I waited for Daniel to say something. He didn't. I looked directly at him. "Is that what you want to?" His eyes moved from me to Linda, then back toward Rachel. "Dad, I just think everybody needs to calm down." It wasn't an answer, and all four of us knew it. Linda reached for the back of her chair. "Thomas, you don't have to leave. It's Rachel's birthday." That hurt more than if she had been angry. She was the one being thrown out, and somehow she was still worried about ruining someone else's evening. I picked up her coat from the hallway. "I came with you," I said. "I'm leaving with you." Rachel folded her arms. "See? Now you're making this into something bigger." I could have answered her. 30 years earlier, I probably would have. Instead, I helped Linda into her coat. Running restaurants had taught me something useful about public arguments. Once a room has decided there is a scene, almost anything you say becomes part of the scene. If I shouted at Rachel, demanded an apology, or dragged Daniel into choosing sides in front of everyone, tomorrow the story would no longer be that Linda had asked about Carol. The story would be that Thomas and Linda ruined Rachel's birthday. So I said goodnight to the room and walked out with my wife. Linda made it halfway to the car before she spoke. "He couldn't even answer you." I knew she meant Daniel. I unlocked the passenger door. He was put on the spot. So was I. There was nothing I could say to that. Inside the house, we later learned, Rachel tried to restart dinner as though the interruption had ended with our departure. Mark didn't let it disappear quite so easily. "Why did Linda have to leave?" he asked. Rachel said Linda had been looking for an excuse to start trouble all evening. Mark apparently stared at her for a moment. "That's strange." Rachel asked what he meant. "You told me before dinner she might get difficult tonight." The room went quiet again. Rachel dismissed it as a precaution and changed the subject. Linda and I knew none of that yet. Driving home, all I had was what I had personally seen. Carol believed she had not been invited. Rachel said she had chosen not to come. Daniel had hesitated before answering, and my wife had been expelled for noticing the contradiction. Those facts bothered me, but they weren't enough to tell me why it had happened. Beside me, Linda stared through the passenger window. I wanted to turn the car around. I wanted to demand that Daniel explain himself while the embarrassment was still fresh. I kept driving. Going back would give Rachel another scene. Whatever had happened in that dining room, I wasn't going to help her write the next version of it. By the time we got home, Linda had stopped talking. She put her purse on the kitchen counter and stood there for a moment without taking off her coat. I keep thinking about the other times, she finally said. What other times? Christmas last year. The barbecue in May. That family picture Susan posted. I knew exactly which events she meant, but until that night, I had never connected them. Christmas dinner had been moved to another evening after Daniel told us plans had changed. The barbecue had supposedly become a small gathering for friends. And when Susan posted a family photograph online a few months earlier, Daniel later said everyone assumed we had decided not to come. At the time, each explanation had seemed reasonable. You think Rachel kept us away from those two? I don't know. Linda finally removed her coat. But I'm starting to wonder how many times someone thought we said no when nobody ever asked us. I didn't want one ugly birthday dinner to rewrite an entire year in my head. We don't know that yet. Linda looked at me. Thomas, she threw me out for asking why Carol wasn't invited. I know. And Daniel stood there. I know that too. The phone rang before either of us could say more. It was Carol. I put her on speaker. I just heard what happened, she said. Are you two okay? Linda gave a tired laugh. I've had better birthdays, and it wasn't even mine. Carol hesitated. Then she said, there's something you need to know. She confirmed what Linda had told Rachel. No invitation had ever reached her. But that wasn't the part that made me sit down. Rachel called me 3 days ago, Carol said. She said they were keeping the birthday small because Linda wanted it peaceful. Linda stared at the phone. I never said that. I know, Carol replied. That's why I'm calling. For the first time that evening, we had more than a strange reaction or Daniel's silence. Rachel had told Carol something in Linda's name that Linda had never said. Linda sat across from me. So how many people heard a different version? I didn't answer immediately. Daniel and I had spoken less over the past year. Fewer Sunday calls. More plans that somehow never lined up. I had told myself that was normal. He was married. He had his own life. I had been determined not to become the father who treated every boundary as rejection. Now I wondered whether some of those boundaries had even come from him. I reached for my phone. Linda watched me. Are you calling Daniel? I almost did. Instead, I put the phone back down. One call from Carol proves Rachel told her something that wasn't true. It doesn't prove everything else. Linda's expression tightened. So we do nothing? No. We find out what actually happened before we accuse anyone of something bigger. She looked away, and I understood what my restraint sounded like to her. She had been humiliated in front of our son, and now her husband was asking for patience. I reached across the table. I believe you. She looked back at me. But if Rachel has been telling different people different things, I want facts, not anger. Because once we say this out loud, we can't take it back. Linda was quiet for a moment. Then she nodded toward the phone between us. Fine, she said. Then let's find out how many versions there are. We didn't have to start calling people. By the next morning, people were already calling us. Mark was the first. He sounded uncomfortable, as if he wasn't sure whether telling me what happened after we left would make things better or worse. I asked Rachel why Linda had to go, he said. She told everyone Linda had been looking for an excuse to cause trouble. I glanced across the kitchen at Linda. And you believed her? Not exactly. Because before dinner, Rachel told me Linda might get difficult. That matched what Carol had suggested, but it still left room for explanation. Then Mark told me about Susan. After we left, he had asked her privately whether Rachel had said anything about Linda beforehand. Susan had received a different warning. Rachel had told her Linda had been upset lately and might leave early. Another relative had apparently understood that Linda hadn't really wanted to attend the birthday at all. 3 explanations. None of them matched. And none matched what Linda had actually done. They started comparing what they'd heard, Mark said. Rachel noticed and shut the conversation down. I thanked him and ended the call. Linda stood with both hands around her coffee mug. So Carol heard I wanted the party small. Mark heard I might start trouble. Susan heard I might leave early. And someone else thought you didn't want to go. Linda shook her head. It still wasn't proof of every suspicion we had discussed the night before. But the problem was no longer one false statement to Carol. There was a pattern forming. My phone rang again that afternoon. Daniel. His voice was tight from the first word. Dad, what are you doing? I'm at home. You know what I mean. Rachel says you're getting people from last night involved. I haven't called anyone from the party. She says everyone is talking because you and Mom walked out. Your mother was told to leave. And you made a point of leaving with her. I let that sit for a second. Daniel, what did Rachel tell you before the party? Silence. About what? About your mother. About Carol. Anything. He exhaled sharply. Dad, don't do this. I'm asking one question. Did you personally hear your mother say she wanted Carol excluded? No, but that's not. Did you hear her say it? No, there it was. One assumption gone. Not the whole story. Not even close. But gone. Daniel immediately became defensive. You're taking one bad night and turning it into some investigation of my wife. I'm trying to understand why different people were told different things. Then stop. I could hear the anger in his voice, but underneath it was something else. Fear, maybe. Or the first discomfort of realizing that the easiest explanation no longer fit. I'm not asking you to choose between us, I said. It feels like you are. We ended the call without resolving anything. For several minutes, I sat staring at the dark screen. Linda didn't ask whether Daniel believed us. She had heard enough of the conversation to know he didn't. Not yet. Later that evening, Susan called. She confirmed what Mark had told me. Rachel had warned her before dinner that Linda might leave early because she had been emotional lately. Then Susan paused. There's something else, she said. I keep thinking about that family picture a few months ago. My grip tightened around the phone. What about it? I remember asking Rachel where you and Linda were. I waited. Susan's voice became quieter. She told me you two didn't want to come. Susan's words stayed with me long after the call ended. That family photograph had bothered Linda at the time, but we had let it go. Daniel had said everyone assumed we had decided not to attend, and I had accepted that explanation because the alternative felt unnecessarily dramatic. Now I wanted to know who had actually made that assumption. Carol gave us another piece the following morning. When I asked only about events she personally remembered, she mentioned 2 occasions when she had been told Linda and I were unavailable. One was the Christmas gathering. The other was a family lunch we had never even known had been planned. I thought you were pulling back, Carol admitted. We thought everyone else was getting busier. That's the strange part, Thomas. I think everybody had an explanation. Mark remembered something too. Months earlier, Daniel had apologized to him for how rarely Linda and I attended family gatherings. He said you two never came anymore, Mark told me. I assumed that was your choice. That one landed differently. Rachel wasn't. Simply telling relatives that we were unavailable. Daniel had begun believing it. I sat at the kitchen table with Linda and thought about the previous year. Shorter phone calls, invitations that never arrived, changed plans we didn't question, photographs of gatherings we learned about afterward. I had treated each incident separately. More importantly, I had treated my silence as respect. When Daniel married Rachel, I promised myself I wouldn't become one of those parents who expected a grown son to organize his marriage around his mother and father. If plans changed, I accepted it. If invitations stopped, I didn't demand explanations. If weeks passed without a call, I told myself Daniel was building his own life. That decision had seemed generous at the time. Now it looked dangerously similar to absence. Linda sat across from me. I don't want him to leave her, she said. I looked up. I know. I don't want the whole family attacking her either. I just want Daniel to know what actually happened before he decides who we are. That gave me the boundary I needed. We would tell the truth we could support. We would not turn relatives into an army. We would not speculate about every missed dinner or every unanswered invitation. And we would not apologize for things we had never done. Before I could decide how to approach Daniel, he called again. This time he sounded exhausted rather than angry. Dad, Rachel says you're calling everybody from the party. People called us. She says you're trying to prove she's been lying for months. I'm trying to understand what happened. Well, stop. I closed my eyes. If that's what you're asking me to do, I will. Linda looked sharply at me. Daniel seemed surprised too. You will? Yes. I won't contact anyone else from the birthday. There was a pause. Thank you. The call ended. Linda stared at me. That makes this harder. I know. We had finally begun seeing the shape of what had happened, and I had just agreed to stop using the easiest path to confirm it. But if I ignored Daniel's request, Rachel could point to every phone call as proof that I was organizing people against her. I wasn't willing to win that way. What I didn't know was that my agreement gave Rachel exactly what she needed next. Silence she could explain for me. For the next 2 days, I kept my promise to Daniel. I called no one from the birthday. I asked no new questions. When Linda wondered aloud whether another missed gathering had been part of the same pattern, I told her we could wonder without pretending we knew. Rachel filled the silence. According to Daniel, she said my sudden decision to stop asking questions proved I knew I had gone too far. She told him Linda had never accepted that marriage changed his priorities, and that the birthday had simply been the first time Rachel finally refused to tolerate it. It was a better version of the story than the one she had started with, and Daniel wanted to believe it. When he called that evening, he sounded tired. "Dad, can we just end this?" "I'd like that." "Then you and Mom apologize to Rachel." She apologizes for telling Mom to leave. Everybody moves on. For a few seconds, I considered it. One apology. A few uncomfortable sentences. Maybe Sunday calls would start again. Maybe Linda would see Daniel without wondering whether every conversation might be the last for another month. I looked across the room at my wife. She knew what Daniel had asked without hearing him. After the call, I told her. Linda was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "I'll accept him being angry with me. I'll even accept him staying away for a while. But I won't apologize for trying to exclude Carol when I didn't do it. It might get us past this." "No, it gets us past the argument by making the lie permanent." That stopped me. An apology would not simply restore peace. It would become confirmation. 6 months later, the story would be that Linda had admitted what she had done. I called Daniel back. "I'm not asking you to take our side," I told him. "I'm asking you to decide after you know what happened." He sighed. "I know what happened. Do you?" Silence. I reminded him of only the things we could support. Carol had never been invited. Rachel had told Carol that Linda wanted the birthday kept small. Linda had never said that. Mark and Susan had received different warnings. Before dinner, and Daniel himself had admitted he never heard his mother ask for Carol to be excluded. I did not tell him Rachel had manipulated every missed gathering. I couldn't prove that. "I'm sending you what directly involves us," I said. After that, I'm done pushing. I sent him the information we already had and left it there. No demand, no threat, no instruction to confront his wife. Daniel didn't answer. That night passed. Then the next day, by the third morning, Linda had stopped checking her phone every time it made a sound. I hated that more than the argument. For the first time, I wondered whether telling Daniel the truth had cost us exactly what I had spent the last year trying not to lose. Our son. What I didn't know was that Daniel's silence wasn't agreement with Rachel anymore. He had started going back through old conversations. And this time, instead of asking us what to believe, he was beginning to check for himself. Daniel called on the fourth evening. His first words were, "Dad, I talked to Aunt Carol." I sat down. Linda was beside me on the couch, close enough to hear his voice through the phone. "What did she tell you?" "The same thing you did." He had called Carol himself. She told him no birthday invitation had ever arrived and repeated exactly what Rachel had said 3 days before the party, that Linda wanted the gathering kept small and peaceful. Then Daniel called Mark. Mark told him Rachel had warned him before dinner that Linda might get difficult. Susan confirmed that she had been told something different, that Linda had been emotional lately and might leave early. Daniel had also gone back through old messages and conversations, comparing what he remembered being told about gatherings we supposedly couldn't attend with what he now knew. "I thought you and Mom were pulling away," he said. Linda closed her eyes. "We thought you were busy," I replied. Neither explanation had come from the other side. Daniel was quiet for several seconds. "I need to talk to Rachel." He didn't ask me what he should say, and I didn't tell him. Later, Daniel told us how that conversation went. He asked Rachel first about Carol. Rachel said she had only been trying to avoid tension. Then he asked why Carol had been told Linda wanted the party kept small when Linda had never said it. Rachel answered that Linda was always uncomfortable when too many relatives were involved. "That's not what I asked," Daniel said. He moved to Mark's warning, then Susan's. Rachel insisted those comments had been harmless attempts to manage different personalities. Daniel asked about the earlier gatherings. That was when her explanation changed. She admitted she had sometimes discouraged invitations because she felt crowded by our family after they married. Every gathering seemed to come with expectations, opinions, questions, traditions. She felt as though becoming Daniel's wife meant joining a family that already had rules she hadn't agreed to. I could understand that feeling. What Daniel couldn't understand was why she had spoken for us instead of setting boundaries herself. "Why didn't you just tell Mom and Dad you wanted more space?" he asked. Rachel said Linda would never have accepted it. Daniel asked, "Did you ever give her the chance?" Rachel had no answer. He offered her one more way out. He told her they could keep the matter private. No family confrontation. No public humiliation in return. She only had to admit what she had done and agree to speak honestly with us. Rachel refused. Instead, she accused Daniel of letting me turn him against his own wife. By then, the issue was no longer whether she had wanted distance. Daniel told her he could have understood that. The issue was that she had created distance by putting words into other people's mouths. Rachel insisted everyone from the birthday should hear her side together. Daniel tried to talk her out of it. She wouldn't. When he called me again, his voice sounded different. Not angry. Not relieved either. Just tired. Rachel wants everyone together, he said. For what? To settle this. I looked at Linda. The last time we had all been in the same room, Rachel had told her to leave. I had no interest in recreating that night. Then Daniel said, "Dad, I'm asking you to come." That changed it. Not because I wanted Rachel exposed. Because for the first time since the birthday, my son wasn't asking me to apologize, stay quiet, or accept someone else's version of what happened. He was asking us to be there when the truth was finally said out loud. We went because Daniel asked us to. That was the only reason Linda agreed. When we arrived, Carol, Mark, Susan, and several of the relatives who had been at the birthday were already there. Rachel stood near the dining room, almost exactly where she had been when she told Linda to leave. For a second, I felt Linda hesitate beside me. I took her hand. Rachel began before anyone else could. She said her birthday had been ruined by a simple disagreement that my wife and I had turned into a family investigation. She said people were judging her over comments she had made while trying to prevent conflict. I let her finish. Then Daniel spoke. I want everybody to say only what Rachel told them personally. Nothing they heard from someone else. Carol went first. She explained that Rachel had told her Linda wanted the birthday kept small and peaceful. Linda said quietly, "I never said that." Mark repeated the warning he had received before dinner, that Linda might get difficult. Susan said Rachel had told her Linda had been emotional and might leave early. Another relative described being told, before an earlier gathering, that Linda and I preferred not to attend. Nobody shouted. That made it harder for Rachel, not easier. Each statement stood on its own. Rachel looked around the room. I was trying to keep the peace. I finally spoke. Wanting space from us would have been your right. She turned toward me, surprised. If you wanted fewer family dinners, fewer visits, or different boundaries, you could have said that. We might not have liked it, but you had the right to ask. Rachel's expression hardened. What you didn't have the right to do was answer for Linda, or Carol, or me. Daniel looked at her. Just tell them what you told me. There it was, another chance to stop. Rachel could have admitted it. Nobody was demanding that she grovel. Nobody was asking Daniel to leave her. Linda hadn't even asked for an apology. Instead, Rachel looked at everyone and said, "If you all believe her over me, then leave." Silence. I felt Linda's fingers tighten around mine. I wasn't going to stand there waiting to see who chose us. "Come on," I said softly. We turned toward the hallway. Behind us, I heard a chair move. Carol reached for her coat. Then Mark stood. Susan followed. One by one, people began collecting purses, jackets, and keys. Rachel stared at them. "You're seriously leaving?" Nobody answered for everyone else. That mattered to me. There was no speech, no agreement, no command. They simply made their own decisions. Then Daniel walked toward the door. Rachel stepped in front of him. "You too." He stopped. "You're really choosing your parents over your wife." Daniel looked at her for a long moment. "No," he said. "I'm choosing not to pretend something false is true." He stepped around her. I didn't feel victorious. Neither did Linda. A week earlier, Rachel had told one woman to leave and expected the rest of the room to stay. Now she stood in that same room watching people walk out because she had given them the choice herself. Outside, Daniel came down the steps behind us. Linda turned when she heard him. For a second, neither of them moved. Then Daniel said, "Mom, I'm sorry I didn't say anything that night." Linda's eyes filled, but she didn't rush toward him. She only nodded. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't repair. But it was the first time since Rachel's birthday that our son had stopped asking us to accept someone else's version of what happened. And for that night, it was enough. Daniel didn't come home with us that night. He went somewhere else for a few days while he and Rachel decided what happened next. I deliberately didn't ask where. Whatever was happening inside their marriage belonged to them. Eventually, Daniel told us they had decided to separate temporarily. Rachel acknowledged some of what she had done, though not all of it. She admitted that she had sometimes spoken for us because avoiding direct conversations felt easier than having them. Linda listened when Daniel told us that, but she didn't treat an admission as an instant repair. Neither did I. I had spent too much time believing that keeping peace meant avoiding uncomfortable conversations. I wasn't going to make the same mistake by pretending everything was fixed because the truth was finally visible. Daniel and I had our own conversation. I should have asked you, he said. All those times I thought you and Mom didn't want to come. And I should have asked why we stopped being invited. He looked surprised. You're not blaming yourself for this, are you? No. But I can admit where I made it easier. That mattered. For months, Daniel had accepted explanations because challenging them would have created conflict inside his marriage. I had accepted distance because challenging it might have made me look like an interfering father. Different reasons. Same silence. We started repairing things in smaller ways. A phone call that didn't need an occasion. Coffee with Daniel one afternoon. Linda sending him a photograph she knew would make him laugh and getting an answer 5 minutes later instead of 5 days later. Nothing dramatic. Rachel remained part of his life, and Linda kept her distance. She didn't demand punishment. She didn't promise forgiveness either. She simply stopped allowing peace to require pretending. Several weeks after the birthday, Daniel invited us to dinner. Just dinner. No relatives gathered around a table. No witnesses. No argument waiting to be settled. When we reached his door, I stepped forward to knock. Then I noticed Linda had stopped. Her hand was still at her side. For one brief second, I knew exactly where she was. Not on Daniel's porch. Back at Rachel's birthday, standing in that dining room while everyone watched and our son said nothing. The door opened. Daniel looked first at me, then at his mother. He noticed her hesitation. He didn't make a joke about it. He didn't tell her she was being silly. He didn't pretend the memory should already be gone. He simply opened the door wider. Mom, he said quietly, nobody here is going to ask you to leave. Linda looked at him for a long moment. Then she stepped across the threshold. Daniel moved aside to let her pass. I followed them inside. Weeks earlier, I had watched my son stand silent while his mother was shown the door. That night, I watched him hold one open for her,